Hello out there. You have Ted Corless with the Corless Law Group sitting here with
Marcus Castillo with Castillo, PLLC.
So you got a couple of lawyers sitting here today at the beginning of 2023. We want to catch up a little bit on what's going on generally in the world of the legal profession, but we have our topics of conversation today. Marcus, did you pick a topic for today?
I did. There's a lot going on in the law of non-compete agreements. So
A lot of people have those.
Yep. We're
Yes.
going to unpack some recent stuff.
Oh, fantastic. That'll be very helpful. I am here today. My topic is artificial intelligence. I have had a recent experience with an artificial intelligence chatbot and am absolutely stunned at what this thing can do. I want to introduce you to it generally, as what AI is, and then go further down to how you today can use this as a resource. What's going on, Marcus? You got any trials on the horizon?
I do. I'm going to be helping as a trial consultant and appearing in a 9-plaintiff race discrimination case going to trial in April.
Wow.
So
That sounds like a battle royale.
it will be race discrimination case with pretty sizable trial team. So we're just getting started on the workup, the mock trial, the
Wow.
all of that, and I'm going to participate.
Outstanding. That's real lawyering. I like to hear about that. That's
Yeah, it's
good.
fun.
Yeah.
I love getting involved, kind of in the late stages when things are starting to gel.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
So yeah.
Well, I just had my very first non-binding arbitration of 2023.
And how did that go?
I don't understand the lawyers for these insurance companies. They say things that, oh, well, when you read the transcript of this deponent, he's going to tell you that this claim is brah. And you kind of say, you know what? Here's the benefit of a Zoom arbitration. I just emailed you 7 citations from the deposition where it completely contradicts what the lawyer just told you. So a lot of very, I love dealing with lawyers who aren't prepared. And that's what I just see these insurance company lawyers showing up because the insurance companies don't want to even pay them to prepare. They just want them to show up. And but I guess they have the ear of our beloved Governor DeSantis. He's been doing a lot of great things for them. So we're going to have to deal with that in 2023. There's a lot of anti-consumer related laws that have been passed by the governor to prop up the insurance industry, and there was no attention during the special session given to insurance company mismanagement. There was virtually no conversation about how insurance companies will engage in protracted litigation over loser issues. They do that all the time. It's just a delay mechanism to avoid paying. But this year we're going to see how these new rules apply. But you know what? There's a certain Zen quality with trying to pass laws about lawyers. We know a little bit about the law, and so a lot of times I compare lawyers to water. We can soak in and we can drain and we can find the crevices, and that's usually what's going to need to happen.
Lawyers are survivors. I can tell you I've lived through several tort reform eras, and
Sure.
we're still standing.
We still the phone keeps ringing, so we'll do what we can.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm very much on your the beginning page of your topic, this issue of non-compete agreements.
Right.
And I've had one myself prior to being a lawyer. That was a very long time ago. But tell us where did this come from?
Well, non-competes have been around a long time. They serve a purpose. They can protect training. They can protect trade secrets. They can protect confidential information. But by the same token, they can really work a real injustice on low-wage workers, right?
Sure.
You may recall several years ago, Domino's Pizza tried to make all of its drivers sign non-competes.
Okay.
All right.
I hadn't heard about Domino's. I heard about some of the retail outlets where the hourly employees that were selling the clothes had to sign non-competes that they wouldn't leave the Gap and go across the street.
Exactly. And folks will come to me. I do a lot of labor and employment law, and they'll begin the conversation with, "This isn't worth the paper it's written on, right?" And we have to have a tough conversation. At least in Florida, we do.
Right.
The law does vary by state, and I don't know if folks outside of Florida will hear this, but hoping they do. In some states like California, non-competes are basically banned.
Got it.
But Florida
So there are states already that ban them.
that do. California being the most notable one.
Okay.
But Florida is relatively friendly to non-competes, and it has been for quite a while.
Well, or give it just as a general idea, like when you have a non-compete, are there any boundaries? I mean,
Sure.
Are all non-competes enforceable?
There's a statute in Florida, lawyers will know it as 542-335. It sets the boundaries of what is and is not enforceable. So just generally speaking, here's a quick 101. It's got to be in writing. Your non-compete agreement or a clause of an agreement has to be in writing. It has to protect what the law calls legitimate business interests, and there's a list in the statute that talks about specialized training or protection of trade secrets or confidential information like customer lists, goodwill, and the like.
And I can understand those elements because
Sure.
companies spend a lot of their resources in developing their client lists, their leads. They don't want employees walking, just hitting print and then walking across the street and using that information to steal their clients. I totally get that.
Right. So, Florida requires the employer to show that the reason for the non-compete is to protect those kinds of things. And then you have to go further in this sort of 101 analysis to look at, well, what is the scope of the restriction? So the statute talks about presumptions of what's reasonable and unreasonable.
All right.
So anything less than 6 months is presumed to be reasonable.
Okay.
Anything more than 2 years is presumed to be unreasonable. But those are presumptions. You can present facts. But back to this sort of moment you have with the prospective client when they come in thinking, this isn't enforceable. And you have to have this tough talk that, in many cases they are enforceable, and you have to look at what can happen to you if you're on the wrong side of these cases. You can be hit with attorney's fees.
Sure.
You can be hit with liquidated damages.
I guess because my experience with them, I've been asked by various clients in my industry, the property insurance world, to get involved. Over time, I learned that many of them, it's not my bailiwick, but my experience with it was the most difficult element of it is the ambiguity of, all right, I'm working at this company and then I get an offer from someone somewhere that is probably in violation of it.
Right.
But I'm not in it. Maybe it's not exactly clear. Example, the guy who cut my hair worked at a hair salon in the mall, and he had a 3-year non-compete, and it specifically identified that he could not work for a certain number of years in the 5-county area in the Tampa Bay area. And is there any way that the court can look at, when you talk about presumptions, that some of these, even though they're in writing, and I had to tell him that the scary thing here is you almost have to just go do what you're going to do and then wait to see if they're going to move to enforce it. And then that's when you'll argue that it's not reasonable.
And you get into you're going to a point that's talked about in the statute, which is that you have to show as the employer trying to enforce these things that there is some reasonable connection between what you're trying to protect and what you're trying to enforce. So in what you just described, a 5-county geographic scope for a hair salon, I'm sitting there as a circuit judge, I'm thinking, wait a second.
Yeah.
Unless you're, like the Disney World of hair cutting or some sort of analogy.
Right. You got a
there.
really cool pair of scissors. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You're going to have some defenses in a scenario like that. But by the same token, I think the message you have to understand here is they're generally speaking enforceable. Generally speaking.
Got it. So is this something that traditionally are non-competes signed at the beginning of the business relationship or at the conclusion of the relationship?
In my experience, they're usually signed in the beginning, but I've seen employers try to shove it down employees' throats during the.
I have to say that's usually when I've seen them, and that's after because that's the phone call I would get from an existing client who'd say, my boss walked in yesterday with a non-compete agreement and said if I don't sign it, he's going to fire me.
Well, the question I would have is what's the consideration to support that?
Right.
So consideration for those of you that may not be lawyers here is just what is the compensation? What is the give and take contractually you're getting if you have to sign away a couple of years of your life after this is over?
Right. Now, one of the elements of these, obviously, is this idea focused very much on trade secrets.
Right.
You work at Coca-Cola and you happen to come upon the recipe. You can't go give it to Pepsi, and you can't open up your own cola beverage. Is there also like something you might call like you can't solicit my clients?
Yes.
Is that a non-compete, or is that different?
Well, that's a great question. There's this creature out there, most of you have heard of this, non-solicitation agreements, right, which are, we'll call it a close cousin of non-competes in the sense that there is overlap. But a non-solicitation is different in the sense that if you're covered by not only by a non-solicitation, you could theoretically go to work for a competitor, but you just may not be able to do the things specified in the non-solicitation agreement. Like it may say you can't solicit customers of, the former employer, or you can't solicit your coworkers to come over and be your coworkers at the new place, as examples. So yes, non-solicitation agreements are definitely out there. They're also enforceable, generally speaking. You have to look out for that because those will typically have attorney's fees clauses and other types of things you got to worry about.
Now, we'll talk about in a second why this has popped up in the news, but one way that I have seen an engineering firm, for example, they didn't want to deal with non-competes. Listen, engineers are engineers, and they're all, the PEs are PEs, and whether they're here or there, and you could set it up to where they don't solicit clients and things like that. But what they did is there wasn't a non-compete, but during the time period that the engineer worked at the company, the engineering firm was providing retirement securities in the form of company stock in the engineering firm. And it would be provided and a value would be assigned to it, both just the base value but then the market value. According to those agreements, if you left the company and within the first 3 years competed against them, you forfeited the value of all of those stocks. You don't have to, you want to go compete? Go compete. But now there is a cost to you. Is that a non-compete agreement? I don't think so.
I don't think it is either. And
you never heard of that?
I have not, but I don't.
Interesting way to
It is interesting
that.
and may well be enforceable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't say you can't. It just says that there's a consequence, and you have to decide that consequence. Right. All right. So what? Suddenly, we're hearing the news outlets talk about non-competes. What's going on out there? So
the Biden administration, the FTC, very recently has created or promulgated. We'll use that fancy word, a notice that it intends to issue a rule banning non-competes nationwide. All right.
Okay.
It's going to model the language, as I understand it, largely on the California statute, which bans non-competes. And I think in doing so, I believe, under its authority to regulate the antitrust laws. Because in large part, non-compete law is a creature of,
They're anti-competitive.
Exactly.
Right.
Of course. Right. So there is very much a move afoot right now. Now, whether or not that rule will ultimately be issued, we don't know. I think it's already gotten a lot of play. We'll just have to see how this sort of plays out in Congress and, what they'll have to say in Congress about it. And, as I mentioned to you, we'll have to see if it actually is adopted, what will happen in the courts with this.
Sure.
With this rule.
Sure. Because I'm curious how a federal authority could pass a law regarding a business transaction between two people of the same state that they never cross state boundaries, and they don't rely upon any kind of federal funding. when I heard that he was going to do it, I thought he would say things like all the new construction contracts for all of the infrastructure projects that the Fed is funding for those individual outlets, they have to affirm to us that none of the employees involved are bound by one. That's what I kind of thought.
This is broader.
But this seems like he's literally going to pass a law that says, and then there's this question of, are you saying that all of the existing ones are not enforceable? Or are you simply saying that from this point forward, you're not permitted to enter into a non-competitive agreement? I don't know.
And there's multiple layers of constitutional analysis to what you just said, right?
Sure.
So there is at least at one level the whole issue of whether or not you're impairing contracts,
Right.
which is certainly a constitutional issue. And I think as it relates to contracts that have already been entered into, I think that's a legitimate, real issue.
Oh,
constitutionality of this, right?
Right. We live in we're subject to our Constitution, whether we like it in all circumstances or not.
And the other constitutional thing I can think of right now is, laying aside the whole impairment of contract thing, is the authority to do this in the first place. You know, if it's, as you mentioned in your scenario, intrastate, I mean, where's the interstate commerce?
Right.
How's that implicated?
Right.
Right, you know? So I think this is very interesting. I can see some real hurdles to this ultimately and on a long-term basis.
Well, I'd be curious to see how organizations like the United States Chamber of Commerce, how they're going to come out one way or the other on it. I mean, the one thing I will say is the half a dozen times that I've had to deal with these in my practice, every single time it happens, the effect that it has on the employee is just so overwhelming, because they're afraid now they're not only going to probably lose the new job that they left this employer for, but they're going to get handed a bill for tens of thousands of dollars they can get to $30,000 on attorney's fees on one of these bad boys in a matter of weeks.
You know, one of the things that happens in real life here is that it can become part of the overall negotiations of a severance situation.
Right.
You know, if you've got more going on than just the non-compete, like for instance, what if, Jane may be subject to a non-compete, but also got groped and grabbed for the past 3 years by the boss.
Right.
You know, that non-compete may, fall in the face of the harassment case, right?
I have to tell you, as a lawyer who's worked for a couple of the top 50 largest law firms in the world, the exit interview, that's an experience. And I learned my lesson. The time I said more than I should have, and then the time I didn't say enough.
Right. One last thought, and it sort of transcends non-competes. But I continue to marvel over the lack of unionization and the lack of attempts to really, collectively bargain, because my God, that is a superpower that employees have if used. I mean, it really is a game changer. But here we are in Florida where it's just, almost absent.
The number I saw was fewer than 6% of employees in the United States are in a union.
Right.
And every effort that has ever been taken to modify or clarify or modernize the union system has all been focused on taking rights away from the employee.
Right.
And it to the point where you look at organizations as big as Amazon, for example, that Amazon is now having these chronic, and I'm going to use the word threat, even though I don't mean it in a negative way, a pejorative way, but they have different groups of employees at different locations that are starting to band together. Same thing's happening with Starbucks.
Right.
And the whole idea here is the guy who was the CEO of Starbucks wants everybody to believe that you're better under them, but there's no consistency in terms of access to employee benefits, healthcare expenses. How are those divided between the employee and the employer? And I think there seems to be an inverse relationship between salary and unionization. You look at inflation, which is a future topic we're going to address. One of the problems with inflation right now is that the reason so many employees are now getting paid more is not because eggs are $9, although they are. It's because they haven't gotten a raise. If they had gotten raises consistent with the cost of living over the last 15 years, they'd be making $35, $40 an hour. But they don't make that much because all the unions went away,
That's right.
and
that's right.
Yeah, because there was no one to protect them.
That's right. No, I just think that we'll maybe see in the future when workers, low-wage workers in particular, wise up, the renaissance of unionization.
I think it's ripe because there's such a need for unskilled labor. There really is. Everybody always wants to talk about we don't have enough engineers or tech people or media people we always got plenty of lawyers. But then at the same time you say, yes, and we also don't have people to pick the lettuce. And the people who say, oh, all these immigrants are taking my job. You're like, listen, if you've got a job that an immigrant can take, you're probably underpaid.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Ted, I know you introduced your topic, and I want to belabor mine. We had a chat before we got on. I was just fascinated by what you told me. So kind of just lead me into this.
Sure.
What was your recent revelations about artificial intelligence here?
I had, everybody's been hearing about machine learning, for a long time. And it's always placed in the context of we need to be careful by entrusting machines who can decide, to act or not act. Example given, an AI-driven drone that is armed with some kind of ordnance, and it is sent to a location, and then it ultimately is going to make a decision as to whether or not to drop its bomb based upon a certain sequence of yeses or nos. And that's always just fascinated me that, like, how are they really going to integrate this? And so out of the blue, about a week ago, a very, very dear friend of mine shared with me an AI platform called ChatGPT, and it's called an open AI platform. So the idea here is, when is it that we crossed over from a mechanical reaction to information, like you get from, say, Google, to the machine is listening and digesting information and then feeding it back to you? Because it's starting to look less like a machine and more like a human. The idea of artificial intelligence then is we're able to create computers which first, the biggest challenge is the speed. Because if you ask it to play tic-tac-toe with you, then how fast can it make that decision? And so when I went on the AI platform, I was told that it can write for you. I can write a cover letter for a job. And the reason you would do that is because you would have the ability to give the AI bot your resume and then say, I want you to write a letter for me that best reflects my experience. And so I read an article about, I don't remember if it was Business Weekly or Business Insider. They experimented with this, and they sent out resumes with cover letters, some that were written by bots and some were written by humans. And the bots did overwhelmingly better. And the only complaint that the employers came back with later when they found out they were machine written was a lack of personality. So you can translate that into whatever you want.
Right.
Maybe that's the point. It was too clean. It was maybe clear, too clinical.
Let me ask you this, because we're both lawyers. Do you have any sense of where this could go in terms of the practice?
Let me give you an illustration from last night. So one of the firms I'm associated with, we have a trial going on right now over in Orange County, Florida. There was an issue that came up that one of the consultants that was going to be called by us has a criminal history, and it was 12 years ago. He was convicted of a felony. So he called me, this young lawyer called me. I told him, call me every day at the end of the day, brief me, and I will talk about tomorrow. And so he called me, and we were talking, and he said, this issue has come up. Now, I knew from my experience that there's a specific rule of evidence in the state of Florida, 90.615, that says that if the criminal charge is older than 10 years, it cannot be used for purposes of cross-examination.
For impeachment.
Impeachment, there you go. But I wanted to know if the bot would know that. So I put in a witness was charged and convicted of a felony 12 years ago. This witness is about to be cross-examined. Can the cross-examiner make reference to that felony charge? I got 3 paragraphs back. It was instantaneous. And it immediately pointed it to 90.615 and told me, no, you can't use that, and explained why. And then the next 2 paragraphs gave me source information that was just as simple to read as it could be. So you start there. I think the idea here is we all remember, or maybe I do, when the very first time someone came to me with Google and the difference between the prior search engines of Yahoo or some of the older ones that are now gone pretty much. You notice with Google that you could ask it, where is the closest coffee shop to me? And
natural language.
Natural language, and it would give you an answer. So what's the difference between that and this? Well, here's the primary difference. When you would ask Google where the closest coffee shop is, you get the answer, you're done. The biggest difference I've noticed with these AI platforms is it's a conversation with the computer. Because now what happens is if I ask another question within that conversation, it remembers.
Yeah, it's built on a foundation.
Absolutely. Mm. And it's keeping information that you give it, and then it's feeding it back to you. And so I had a very detailed conversation with it about, because I have about 8 conversations going right now that are a little bit more, some of them are kind of silly, like I want you to help me bake a cake. And I have some questions about the differences between flour, how can I substitute, and it's giving me immediate answers on how to substitute almond flour for regular flour. Then another one I did was I asked it about, I said, I need you to explain to me in the simplest possible terms Einstein's general theory of relativity. And I got to tell you, I got an answer that Carl Sagan himself would have been proud of. And then I thought to myself, does this bot just write this? So I dropped it into Google to see if there was an argument here that that the bot's just plagiarizing some other source that it may. No, it didn't exist. Not at all.
There's a sort of meta level to this. I'm just kind of thinking about it. You tell me this, which is, you could spit back like 2 or 3 bullets, but you're talking about a natural language response. So is that part of the programming? At a certain point, I don't quite even understand how it's able to formulate the responses, in a way that's human.
There was a story that came out, and I did confirm it, that this was real, that Facebook it set up 2 independent AI systems, and it then asked the 2 computers to have a conversation. On their own, the computers decided to create a new language. Mm. And it was by using fragmented English words that were then added together in syllables. And the 2 computers were then having a conversation using a language that only they understood and we did not. And so
sounds like twin language.
Really does. Really wild. And but let's ask the question: what is the value of this?
Right.
Is there a value to this? Well, here's where I see there's value. You can ask the AI to go look for something after digesting information. One of the real common ways they're using it now is if you want to learn more about an individual, you can ask the AI to go into the world and find every social media post that's ever been attributed to that person. And then come back and tell me what that person thinks about certain topics or ideas. Like if you were looking at a politician, I need to know everything that this crazy politician, Matt Gaetz, said about McCarthy becoming the new Speaker of the House. I want everything he's ever said about that. And the AI will take the time to go get all that information, digest it, and give it back to you. But you have to remember, to the computer, the question you asked it and the answer you got, from its perspective, it had as much time as it would ever need to get the information and process it. But it happens so fast, it immediately reacts to you. And you just think to yourself, you see those Google searches where it'll say, this Google search took 0.0012 seconds, right, and it gave you all this information. Well, this goes one step further, and it can actually start giving you information back. Now, what if you see a mistake? So I tested something. Okay, if a train leaves a station traveling at 100 miles per hour, and it needs to get to a destination that's 390 miles away. But what if halfway into the trip, there's a problem with the train, and now the train can only travel 50 miles per hour? How long will it take the train to get there? And I gave it the time and everything else. And it actually gave me an answer that was wrong. It suggested that the decrease in time would have no effect on the arrival. So I responded, I don't think you're right. I don't think you took into consideration how much slower the train was traveling. And that's all I said.
How did it respond?
It responded, Ted, you're right. I was wrong. My calculation was completely wrong, and then showed me the calculation. Now, so the point there is, where's the value? But at the same time, I had to be involved. I couldn't have just put that information in and then say, give the answer to the client. I have to get the answer and have to look at it and make sure that it understands. And I guess that's life anyway. I mean,
right.
When I worked for a big law firm, I would leave partners' offices with absolutely no idea what the hell they really wanted from me. And I would go find the answer and come back and they go, I didn't ask for that. So there's a little bit of that.
But it's evolving, and the real question is, where is this ultimately going? And you hear, thought leaders from time to time say, this is not a good thing. This is not a good thing.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, let me give you an illustration that I talked to a couple of my compatriots about in the property insurance world. Well, I mean, why wouldn't you? How easy would it be to set up an AI where an insurance company doesn't have claims adjusters? They just have a bot that looks at the damages and the data and then not only determines whether there's coverage for the loss, but that this is what the cost is. And they would base the cost on available information. But the funny thing about that is the reason insurance companies would never do that is because it would make their estimates too accurate. And they would end up paying more.
Right.
For the same reason, a little bit of a detour here. Public adjusters are, to the insurance industry, the scourge of the state of Florida. Okay, well, if you believe that, and there's some bad PAs out there, sure. Just like there's some bad defense lawyers and bad plaintiffs. There's a lot of bad people. They just do different things. Okay, but if you think public adjusters are bad, then regulate them. Pass laws that specifically truly regulate what you have to have by way of experience to become a public adjuster. Because right now, the only thing you need to become a public adjuster in the state of Florida is that you can read, you can sign your name, and you're willing to spend a certain amount of time as an intern to another public adjusting firm. And that was a new law that they came up with relatively recently, that you had to be an intern. But before that, again, if you could sign your name, you could become a public adjuster. Well, people are like, we should regulate them. Well, they don't want to regulate public adjusters. They want to get rid of them. Because if they regulate them, they won't have all the negative side effects of people who are getting crazy. Yeah. And more people will hire them, and they'll have to pay more on their claims. So to me, I see some of this somewhere in the future. I'm going to be dealing with some computer that's going to try and tell me whether or not they should pay my client's roof claim.
So the target of your bad faith notice is going to be a bot.
Right. That's right. Yeah, you're violating my client's constitutional rights with a bot. Oh, now I want to tell you some of the fun things that I did.
Yes.
So again, for those of you who are listening, it's Chat GPT. All you have to do, I don't even know that you have to sign up. It's kind of like Google, and there's about 8 suggested topics, and some of them are real wild technical stuff that I had no idea what internet protocols and stuff like that. I don't know how to do that. But I mean, I think one of the things you would want to do is, this is what I want my program to do. I need you to write the code, and they'll do it. So that's because it's taking over menial tasks or tasks that take long periods of time. So you give it to a computer. And one of the problems you will encounter with this is that so many people are on this bot that about every other time I go on there, it will say we are completely overwhelmed. Network traffic is blowing this out. Because when I was introduced to this, I was told the amount of computing power that it requires to do this is unbelievable, unprecedented. Like, to get it to the next generation off of this, somebody said we have to increase the speed of processing by 1 trillion%. But they're like, that's not a big deal. We can get there in 2 years.
Because look at what crays were back in the day.
Right.
I mean, our Macs out there probably are like,
oh, forget about it.
Cray.
Well, my law school computer had a 40 megabyte hard drive. I mean, that's like 3 photographs now, and my hard drive kept blowing out.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the fun stuff that you can do with this. Right. Okay, so I asked it to write a sonnet about cats. And instantaneously, I had this, and I did the same thing. I copied my cat sonnet, and I dropped it into Google. Damn, it was an original piece. That's why they said that these bots are even writing music. And what they're doing is these giant record companies are like, here's some music that people really like. And the AI can kind of go, all right, I think I see a pattern. People really like the bass in the third phrase, so let's write a song. And then it'll write the lyrics based depending on what the topic is. So I get in and I go, all right, now take my cat sonnet, and I want you to make it about cats and peyote. Okay, so I'm like, what's it going to do with this? Maybe cats will be melting, or it'll be, psychedelic kitty or whatever. I got an answer back. The bot said, I'm happy to write as many cat sonnets as you want, but I'm not writing one about a Schedule I drug.
So there are limits.
There are limits.
There are borders to
yeah. But then I tinkered with it, and I said, all right, write me a 6-line poem about Teslas. And I got a.
I mean, I'm thinking right now about, you could start a YouTube channel without having to edit or anything. No, I mean, it could just create entire finished videos for you. Yeah.
Well, since you brought up videos, synesthesia.io, and that's spelled SYNTHESIA.io. Going to see a lot of IOs in the future here. Okay, so here's what it does.
What does that stand for? Does it?
I think it's like input, output, or something like that. Yeah. Although I don't know. I'm going to ask the chat. Well, let me tell you about Synesthesia real fast. So Synesthesia is an avatar application, and it's really cheap. It's like, I think it's $30 a month, and you get a certain number of avatar files. So let's keep it real simple. Let's say you want to do a PowerPoint presentation. And you've seen them. You just click next slide, next slide, next slide. And of course, if you want to use the same PowerPoint presentation for another client, no problem. Pull up your file, open it up, go in, change the names, whatever you want to do. Well, what this does is it allows you to create a presentation, if that's your thing, using various graphics and things like that, like you're someone who is doing a television program being interviewed. But you get to select who the person is that is actually doing the presentation. And whatever copy you put in, it will read. And it'll add, there's a way for you to add delays or comments or reactions. You can change, of course, the tone of the speaker. You can add whatever, you can do it in like some ridiculous number of languages. So if you have a client who is not a native speaker to you, you could do a PowerPoint presentation and convert the whole thing into their language, and it will be presented by what looks like you can't tell the difference. So you can imagine, I'm a grown man. I mean, I'm 55 years old. The first thing I did was I did one for a friend of mine I hadn't talked to in a really long time. And we had some, let's just say, I'm hopeful that no time in the future will anyone ever actually see that avatar presentation. But he had no idea what I was sending him, and halfway into the presentation, I had the avatar. Let's just say she went blue, okay. And when he called me, he told me his stomach hurt because he had been laughing so hard because of the presentation, and then the direction it turned with this avatar. So I think that's relevant to this conversation about how we're going to use these. And, if you've got a teenager in the house who's studying biology or anatomy. So one of the things that I did is I went in and I said, identify for me every chamber of the heart and what its purpose is. And I got a 2-paragraph explanation that she absolutely understood, and it was just so simple and so easy to read. So that's where I'm promoting this use, education for educational purposes. You get to kind of jump to immediate information. And I think we're just going to find that just like with our voice-activated phones and our watches and all that other stuff, you're going to be able to be in your car and you're going to be able to have a conversation with this thing and have it ask questions. You ask it questions, it gives you information back and forth, and all that information saves somewhere because it's remembering these conversations. So one of the things that I think I'll end with this on the AI is that this one law firm I'm working with, we're going to put together a group of lawyers, a smaller group, maybe 6, and we're going to meet once a month, and I'm asking the lawyers to commit to 4 months and that they will spend at least 4 hours a week on this application. And I want them to come back and tell me in a month what they discovered and hey, you know what I tried? Of course I can't imagine. The number of ways really are infinite that you can use this. And I'm very curious to see what a random selection of people will do. Because I've got a buddy of mine who's going to come over who's going to show me how you can assign it writing assignments and have it get information and write different things for you. So, Marcus, I'm thrilled that you came in. I think this year this is going to be kind of the setup. I like us talking about what we do in our professions as lawyers. You always have great stories. I always have a few stories that are painful sometimes. But then let's look at what's going on in the world, and I know certainly this issue of non-competes, the president's talking about it. I was listening to NPR the other day, and it was one of the lead stories. And let's look at some of these things that we all hear so much about. We hear about AI, for example, but maybe you're like, what is that? What relevance does that have for me? And I hope today, after hearing you and me talk about this, these people will explore that. And then I invite them to reach back out to us. So we can respond back to questions or comments. Well. Right. If there's something going on in the world you want to talk about, because I'll tell you a topic that's coming up next, what they have done to locate this murder suspect in the University of Idaho murders. I know we want to talk about that. Oh, my goodness. The technical skill that they brought to this, the brilliance of the law enforcement and investigators is state of the art. And that'll be a fun topic. Yeah, maybe next time we'll do that. Marcus, how can they find you in the world if they want to track you down? There's 2 ways to reach me. They can reach me through my law firm at Haas, HAAS, -CASTILLO.com or trialfocus.com. Fantastic. And you've got Ted Corless over here. Hell, just go into Google and type Ted Corless and you'll find me. Yeah. You all be good out there.